The wheelchair rolled to a stop beside the corner table at Bellissimo Bistro, and Lee Sung-woo's fingers drummed once against the armrest before falling still. He'd been here 30 minutes already, watching former lieutenants at the bar trade stories that grew louder with each round, their laughter sharpening into something crueler. The other diners tried not to stare, but he felt their pity like knives against his skin. The great ghost of Seoul, once feared head of the Sundo Syndicate, reduced to sitting alone while men who used to bow now mocked the scars running down his neck like a roadmap of his downfall. He was calculating the fastest exit route when the door opened and a woman entered. Deep brown skin glowing under the bistro's amber lights, natural coils pulled back from her face, a medical badge still clipped to her jacket pocket. Her shoulders carried the weight of someone who'd worked a double shift, but her spine stayed straight as she scanned the room. One of the lieutenants at the bar, Kim something? Sung-woo couldn't remember his name anymore, nudged his companion and gestured toward the wheelchair with a smirk that made Sung-woo's jaw tighten. "Boss looks lonely," Kim said, just loud enough to carry. "Maybe someone should roll him back to the nursing home." The laughter that followed hit like a physical blow. The woman's eyes landed on Sung-woo immediately, taking in the scene with the sharp assessment of someone trained to read body language in veterinary emergencies. Most people looked away when they saw the scars, the wheelchair, the barely controlled rage in his expression. She didn't. Instead, something flickered across her face. Not pity, but recognition of a fellow creature backed into a corner. Then she was walking straight toward his table, her worn sneakers soundless against the polished floor. "This seat taken?" she asked, already pulling out the chair across from him. The bar fell silent. Kim's smirk died. Every eye in the bistro turned to watch as this woman, this stranger who had no reason to care about a broken gangster, sat down like she'd been invited, meeting Sung-woo's shocked stare with eyes that held exhaustion, defiance, and something else he couldn't name. Completely unafraid. Zoe Jackson had exactly $142.60 left in her bank account, a fact that pressed against her skull like a migraine as she pushed through the doors of Bellissimo Bistro in Chicago's Gold Coast. The job interview at the animal hospital in Lincoln Park had gone sideways when they'd mentioned the position was actually unpaid internship to hire, and "will be in touch" never meant actual calls. Still, she'd promised herself one decent meal this week, something that didn't come from a box or a can, even when keeping that promise meant choosing between dinner and her phone bill. The bistro smelled like garlic and wine, warm and expensive against the brutal February cold she'd just escaped. Zoe scanned the space with the same instinct that helped her spot stressed animals before they bit. Young professionals performing success over cocktails, an elderly couple celebrating something quiet and private, and a man in a wheelchair positioned near the back corner, his profile sharp and striking despite, or perhaps because of, the vicious scar tissue running down his neck. A group at the bar was watching him with the kind of predatory amusement that made her stomach turn. "Excuse me, miss?" The hostess materialized with practiced politeness. "Just one for dinner?" But Zoe's attention had already shifted. She knew that look in the wheelchair-bound man's eyes, the same cornered animal expression she saw in abused dogs right before they either surrendered or attacked. The same look she'd seen in her own mirror the morning she got the eviction notice. The group at the bar laughed again, and something in her, some part that was tired of watching the world's casual cruelties pile up like unpaid bills, made the decision before her brain caught up. "Actually," Zoe said, moving past the hostess, "I see my friend." She walked straight to his table, aware of every stare burning into her back, aware of the danger radiating off this scarred stranger like heat off asphalt, aware that sitting down was probably the stupidest thing she'd done all month. She sat down anyway. "This seat taken?" The words came out steadier than she felt. Up close, she could see his eyes were dark and bottomless, could see the exact moment his shock shifted into something calculating and curious. Could see the scars were surgical, precise. The kind that came from an operating room trying to put someone back together after they'd been shattered. "Who are you?" His voice was rough silk, accented, dangerous. "Someone who's had a really long day," Zoe said, meeting his stare without flinching, "and doesn't have the energy to watch grown men act like children." Behind them, the bar had gone deathly quiet, and Lee Sung Woo, the ghost of soul, the paralyzed former kingpin who hadn't smiled in 3 years, felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward despite himself, drawn to the fearless exhaustion in this stranger's eyes, to the way she'd chosen to see the man instead of the wheelchair. Drawn to someone who understood what it meant to sit down when the whole world expected you to walk away. The scar tissue pulled tight when Seung-woo turned his head too quickly, a reminder that lived in his body like a second nervous system. 3 years since the night his own blood brother had engineered the accident. Nothing accidental about the way Park Min-jae had tampered with the brake lines, then called ahead to ensure the intersection would be empty of witnesses. The Tesla had wrapped around the light pole at 70 miles per hour on Lakeshore Drive, and Seung-woo had felt his spine compress in sections, vertebrae folding like a paper chain. He'd woken 6 weeks later to discover Min-jae sitting in the chairman's seat at Sundo Syndicate headquarters, to discover his legs were decorative now, to discover that mercy was just another word for contempt. They'd let him live because dead martyrs were dangerous. Paralyzed ghosts were just sad. The doctors had rebuilt his throat where the steering column crushed it. The scars ran from his jaw to his collarbone in raised ridges that people couldn't stop staring at, couldn't stop using as evidence that he was finished. He could still give orders, still read ledgers, still know every import route from Busan to Los Angeles by heart. But the men who used to fear him now measured him by what he couldn't do. Couldn't stand, couldn't fight, couldn't chase down traitors personally, couldn't even get through dinner at Bellissimo without being mocked by foot soldiers who once wouldn't meet his eyes. Until tonight. Until a woman with exhausted defiance in every line of her body had sat down across from him like his scars were just geography, not a referendum on his worth. Who is she? Across the city, Zoe Jackson stared at the eviction notice taped to her apartment door in Pilsen, the red lettering screaming "Final Warning" loud enough to wake the neighbors. 60 days overdue, $4,100 owed immediately or face legal action. Her younger brother Marcus's medical bills had swallowed her savings like a black hole, the sickle cell crisis that landed him in the ICU for 2 weeks. The experimental treatment their insurance called elective, the ambulance rides that cost more than her monthly rent. She'd taken every shift the veterinary clinic offered, sold her car, maxed out her credit card, called her mother in Atlanta and lied about being fine. And still the numbers climbed faster than she could run, a race she'd been losing since Marcus coded on the operating table, and she'd told the doctors to do whatever it took. Whatever it took. Now whatever it took meant standing in the hallway at midnight, holding a notice that might as well be a death sentence, wondering if the man from the bistro, the one with scars like lightning strikes and eyes that saw too much, had been real or just another hallucination born of exhaustion and desperation. Seung-woo's driver found her in 4 hours. The silver charm bracelet she'd left behind at Bellissimo, a tiny stethoscope and paw print dangling from the chain, had been enough. One phone call to his remaining loyal contacts, another to the bistro's security footage, a third to cross-reference veterinary clinics in a 5-mile radius. By dawn, he had her full name, her address, her employment history, and the knowledge that Zoe Jackson was drowning in ways that made his paralysis look like an inconvenience. He told himself he was returning lost property. That was the story he gave his driver when they pulled up to the Pilsen walk-up at 7 a.m. on a Saturday. That was what he'd say when she opened the door and found him sitting in his wheelchair on the sidewalk because the Building's front steps made the entrance impossible. The truth sat heavier. He hadn't been able to stop thinking about the way she'd looked at him. Not through him, not past him, not at the wheelchair or the scars. At him. Zoe appeared 15 minutes after his driver knocked, looking like she'd slept in her clothes. Because she had. Passed out on the couch after staring at the eviction notice until the letters blurred into abstract threats. Her natural coils were smashed flat on one side, her scrubs wrinkled, and there was a coffee stain on her sleeve she didn't remember getting. "You," she said, freezing halfway down the stairs. "How did you... You dropped this." Shengwu held up the bracelet, sunlight catching the silver. "At the restaurant." She touched her wrist automatically, finding it bare. The charm had been a gift from Marcus before the diagnosis, back when he still had the energy to tease her about her obsession with animals. She'd thought it was gone forever. Another small loss in a year of catastrophic ones. "Thank you." She descended the rest of the way slowly, aware that her hands were shaking as she reached for it. "You didn't have to track me down. I don't do things I don't have to do." His eyes tracked the eviction notice visible through her ground floor window, the overflowing recycling bin of instant ramen containers, the way her jacket was held together with a safety pin where a button should be. "You're in trouble." It wasn't a question. Zoe's spine stiffened, pride flaring hot despite the evidence plastered everywhere. "I'm managing." "No." His voice was gentle, which somehow made it worse. "You're surviving. There's a difference." He paused, choosing his next words with the precision of someone who knew how easily dignity shattered. "I'm told I owe you a favor. For last night." "You don't owe me anything." "Then consider it a business proposition." Shengwu met her exhausted, wary eyes. "I need someone. You need money. We can help each other." The check sat on her kitchen table like a live grenade. $25,000. Written in Sungwoo's precise handwriting, made out to her landlord's property management company, with a memo line that simply read, "Rent in arrears, Z. Jackson." "I can't accept this." Zoe's voice came out strangled. She'd let him upstairs only because the neighbors were already staring, because something in his expression had been too raw to dismiss. Now he sat in her cramped living room, wheelchair barely fitting between the second-hand couch and coffee table, and looked at her like she was the one being unreasonable. "You already have. I had my attorney wire it this morning." He gestured to her laptop, open to her email. The confirmation from the property management sat in her inbox, time-stamped 6:47 a.m. "Your eviction is resolved. You had no right—" "I had every right the moment you sat at my table." His voice cut through her rising panic, sharp and certain. "The men at that bar, they would have escalated. Kim has a history of violence when he's drunk and embarrassed. You put yourself between me and that, whether you meant to or not." Zoe sank into the chair across from him, her legs suddenly unreliable. The number on the check blurred and refocused. $25,000, more than she'd make in 8 months at the clinic. "Why?" "Because I need someone I can trust, and trust is the rarest currency I deal in." Sungwoo leaned forward, and she saw calculation in his eyes mixed with something that looked like desperation. "The Sundo Syndicate is full of vipers waiting for me to show weakness. My own blood put me in this chair. Everyone around me has an agenda, a price, a moment they're waiting for to put a knife in my back. And you think I'm different? I think you're the only person in 3 years who looked at me and saw a man, not an opportunity." He pulled out a second document, slid it across the table. $100,000 a year. Personal aid. You'll manage my schedule, attend meetings, be my eyes and ears in rooms where people think I'm too broken to matter. The number hit her like a physical force. $100,000. Marcus's treatments covered, her mother's mortgage saved. A future that didn't involve choosing between food and phone bills. I'm a veterinary nurse, she whispered. I don't know anything about. You know how to read a room, how to see when something's wrong, how to stand your ground. His scarred hand rested on the contract. I don't need another criminal, Zoe. I need someone unafraid to speak their mind. Someone who'll tell me the truth even when it costs them. Why me? Because you already did. The Sundo Syndicate headquarters occupied the 42nd floor of a glass tower in the Loop, the kind of building where elevators required key cards and security cameras tracked every breath. Zoe's reflection stared back at her from the polished chrome as she rode up beside Sung-woo, wearing clothes she'd bought yesterday with money that still felt stolen, a tailored black blazer, pressed slacks, heels that made her ankles wobble. Remember? Sung-woo said quietly. You're not here to make friends. You're here to watch and listen. The elevator doors opened to reveal a sprawling space of marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Men in expensive suits turned to stare as Sung-woo's wheelchair rolled through, their conversations dying like cut strings. Zoe felt their assessment crawl across her skin, cataloging her dark skin, her natural hair, the way she didn't belong in their world of white faces and old money crime. The conference room held 8 men around a table made of black walnut. Park Min-jae sat at the head, the blood brother who'd engineered Sung-woo's accident, his smile sharp as glass when they entered. Sung-woo, you brought a guest. Min-jae's eyes slid over Zoe with calculated disrespect. I didn't realize we were hiring entertainment. The room's temperature dropped 10 degrees. This is Ms. Jackson, my new personal aide. Sung-woo's voice stayed level, but Zoe heard the blade hidden underneath. She'll be attending all future meetings. Your aide. One of the lieutenants, the same Kim from Bellissimo, laughed. Is that what we're calling them now? How much does personal assistance cost these days? Zoe's jaw tightened, heat flooding her face. She started to speak, to defend herself, but Sung-woo moved first. Kim. Just the name, spoken soft as silk. Tell me, how much did your wife's surgery cost last year? The one I paid for when you came begging because your gambling debts ate your insurance premiums? Kim's smirk died. $83,000? Sung-woo's eyes were black ice. I remember because I don't forget investments. And I'm wondering right now if that investment was worth keeping a man who questions my judgment in my own house. The silence stretched thin enough to shatter. Min-jae watched with vague amusement, but the other men looked anywhere except at Kim, who'd gone pale. Ms. Jackson is here because I trust her. Sung-woo's gaze swept the room, daring anyone else to speak. Question her again, question me, and we'll discuss whether your position here is still viable. Nobody questioned. Zoe stood straighter, feeling something dangerous bloom in her chest. Not quite gratitude, not quite fear. Something closer to recognition of the ruthless authority still burning inside the paralyzed man beside her. The photograph arrived 3 weeks into Zoe's employment, slipped under her apartment door while she slept. No envelope, no note. Just a glossy 8x10 of her walking into the veterinary clinic, time-stamped from yesterday morning, a red circle drawn around her face like a target. Her hands shook as she called Sung-woo. Don't touch it, he said immediately. I'm sending someone. The someone turned out to be a woman named Jiwon, ex-Korean intelligence, who arrived with latex gloves and a scanner that checked for substances Zoe didn't want to think about. She bagged the photograph with clinical efficiency, while Zoe sat on her couch trying not to fall apart. Kang Dae-jung, Sung-woo said when he arrived 20 minutes later, his driver helping maneuver the wheelchair through her doorway. It's his signature move. Photographs first, then escalation. Who is he? The man who wants what I have left. Sung-woo's jaw was tight, anger radiating off him in waves. He runs the Southside operations, drugs, weapons, trafficking. We've had an understanding for years, territories clearly defined. But he's been pushing boundaries since my accident, testing how much ground he can take before I push back. Zoe's throat felt tight. And I'm the test. You're the message. He wheeled closer, and she saw something raw in his expression. He's telling me he knows where you are, that you matter, that hurting you would hurt me. The implications settled over her, like ice water. She'd known the job was dangerous in abstract terms. Syndicate politics, criminal organizations, the kind of violence that happened in headlines. But this was concrete. This was her face in a red circle. This was someone watching her, following her, deciding whether she lived or died based on how much pain it would cause Sung-woo. Maybe I should quit. The words came out small. Go back to Atlanta. Disappear. He'd follow you. Men like Dae-jung don't let opportunities go once they've identified them. Sung-woo's scarred hand reached out, stopped just short of touching hers. But I can protect you. My penthouse has security that makes Fort Knox look casual. Bulletproof windows, panic rooms, guards who actually know what they're doing. You're asking me to move in with you. I'm asking you to let me keep you alive. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and Zoe realized with sudden clarity that this wasn't just about syndicate politics or power plays. This was about a man who'd already lost everything once, staring at the possibility of losing something, someone, again. When? She whispered. Tonight. The text message arrived at 2 a.m., lighting up Zoe's phone on the nightstand of Seung-woo's guest room, where she'd been staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep in a space larger than her entire Pilsen apartment. The number was blocked. The message was 3 words, and an attachment. Pretty brother you have. The photo showed Marcus outside the Atlanta VA hospital where he received his sickle cell treatments. His thin frame unmistakable even in profile. His medical alert bracelet visible on his wrist. Someone had taken it today. Yesterday, technically. While Zoe had been in Chicago thinking he was safe, thinking distance meant protection. She was out of bed and halfway to the door before her brain caught up to her body, barefoot on marble floors, her breath coming in sharp gasps. She needed to call him, needed to warn him, needed to get on a plane and bring him here or send him somewhere, anywhere that Kang Dae-jung's reach couldn't. Zoe. Sung-woo's voice stopped her in the hallway. He was already awake, wheelchair positioned outside his bedroom door like he'd been waiting, like he'd known. They found Marcus. Her voice broke on her brother's name. They're threatening my brother. I know. Ji-won intercepted it and alerted me. He moved closer, and in the dim emergency lighting his scars looked deeper, more violent. Your brother is already en route. Private transport, armed security. He'll be here by dawn. The words took a moment to penetrate her panic. You... what? I called your mother 3 hours ago. Explained the situation. She wasn't happy, but she understands that Atlanta isn't safe right now. His expression was grim. Neither is Chicago, but at least here I can control the variables. Marcus will stay in the second guest suite. Medical staff is being arranged for his treatments. Your mother declined to come, but she knows he's protected. Zoe's knees went weak. She caught herself against the wall, overwhelmed by the efficiency of his response, by the fact that he'd moved her entire family like chess pieces while she'd been pretending to sleep. You can't just... I can. I did. Sung-woo's voice was steel wrapped in exhaustion. Dae-jung made this personal the moment he photographed you. Now he's escalated to family. That's a declaration of war, and I don't lose wars. People die in wars. Her whisper echoed in the vast hallway. Yes. He met her eyes without flinching. Which is why Marcus stays here until Dae-jung is no longer a threat. Which is why you don't leave this building without a security detail. Which is why... His voice softened fractionally. You're going to let me do what I'm good at, Zoe. Let me protect what matters. What matters? Not who. The distinction felt important. Dangerous. She nodded anyway, too tired and terrified to argue. Marcus had been asleep. For 3 hours, finally calm after his initial panic gave way to exhaustion. The penthouse felt like a luxury prison, 60 floors above Chicago, bulletproof glass separating them from a world that wanted them dead. Zoe found Shungwoo on the terrace, wrapped in a coat against the March wind, staring at the city lights like they held answers. "You should be sleeping," he said, without turning around. "So should you." She stepped out beside him, the cold biting through her borrowed sweater. "Thank you. For Marcus. For all of it. Don't thank me yet. Daeyoung won't stop because I moved pieces off the board." His hands gripped the wheelchair arms. "He'll escalate until one of us is dead." The certainty in his voice made her throat tight. "Tell me what really happened. The accident." Seungwoo was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Park Min-jae was my brother in everything but blood. We built Sundo together from nothing. 2 kids from Seoul with more ambition than sense. I trusted him with my life." His laugh was bitter. "Turns out that was a mistake. He cut your brakes. He did it himself. I know because he told me afterward when I was in the hospital. Came to my bedside and explained how he'd been planning it for months, how the organization needed someone who could walk, who could fight, who wasn't weak." The scar tissue on his neck stood out in the dim light. "He let me live because killing me would have made me a martyr. This way, I'm just a reminder of what happens when you get soft." Zoe's hand found his before she could stop herself, her fingers closing over his scarred knuckles. "You're not weak. I'm paralyzed, Zoe. I can't protect you the way I should be able to. Can't stand between you and danger. Can't—" his voice cracked. "Can't even walk you to safety if this building comes under attack. You moved my brother across 3 states in the middle of the night. You faced down your entire syndicate for me. You're fighting a war. To keep me alive." She knelt beside the wheelchair, forcing him to look at her. "That's not weakness. That's everything." His eyes were dark and wounded, searching her face like he didn't believe her. "Why did you sit at my table that night?" "Because you looked like I felt. Alone. Exhausted. Like the world had decided you didn't matter anymore." Her thumb traced his knuckles. "Because I saw you, Seungwoo. Not the chair. Not the scars. You." He kissed her then, desperate and careful and terrified. And Zoe kissed him back, tasting 3 years of loneliness on his lips. The war lasted 72 hours and left Chicago's underworld permanently redrawn. Seungwoo orchestrated it from the penthouse command center, a room Zoe hadn't known existed until Jiwon unlocked the hidden door behind the library. Screens covered every wall, displaying live feeds from Daejung's warehouses, tracking data on shipments, monitoring encrypted communications that Seungwoo's tech team had cracked months ago. He'd been waiting for the right moment to strike. Daejung threatening Zoe had given him one. "The Southside gun storage goes first," Seungwoo said into his headset at midnight on day 1. "Anonymous tip to the ATF. Make sure the serial numbers trace back to Daejung's suppliers." Zoe watched from the doorway as federal agents swarmed the warehouse on screen, seizing enough illegal weapons to put Daejung's entire distribution network under investigation. Seungwoo's expression never changed. Cold, focused, absolutely ruthless. By dawn of day 2, Daejung had lost 4 trafficking routes. Seungwoo had contacted every port authority from Seattle to San Diego, every customs official he'd spent years cultivating. Shipments disappeared into evidence lockup, containers were flagged for inspection, money vanished into bureaucratic black holes. "He's trying to reach out," Jiwon reported at hour 43, "wants to negotiate." "No." Seungwoo didn't look up from the screens. "He threatened what's mine. There's no negotiation." Day 3 brought the financial kill shot. Sung-woo had spent years tracking Daejung's money laundering operation through a restaurant chain that stretched across 5 states. Now he fed every transaction record to the IRS, the FBI, and 3 investigative journalists simultaneously. By noon, Daejung's legitimate front was burning, his assets frozen, his name plastered across headlines that ensured every law enforcement agency in the country would be watching. "It's done," Sung-woo said at hour 71, leaning back in his wheelchair. He looked hollowed out, exhausted in ways that went beyond physical. "Daejung's finished. He'll be in federal custody by morning, and even if he makes bail, he has nothing left to threaten you with." Zoe had watched him dismantle a man's entire empire with nothing but information, strategy, and the kind of calculated brutality that came from protecting something he couldn't bear to lose. She should have been terrified, should have seen the ghost of Soul and remembered he was still dangerous, still capable of destruction. Instead, she crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him from behind, pressing her face into his shoulder. "You came back to me." His scarred hands covered hers, trembling slightly. "Always." Outside, dawn broke over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. Spring came to Chicago with the kind of warmth that felt like forgiveness. Marcus had gained 15 pounds and started physical therapy at Northwestern, his treatments fully covered by the health insurance Sung-woo had quietly arranged. Park Min-jae had been removed from the Sundo Syndicate in a bloodless coup orchestrated through board votes and carefully leaked evidence of embezzlement. The organization was being dismantled piece by piece, its legitimate holdings transferred to a private equity firm that Sung-woo controlled from behind layers of corporate structure. "I'm tired of being a ghost," he'd told Zoe one morning, watching the sun rise over Lake Michigan. "I want to be alive again." Now, 2 months after Daejung's arrest, Sung-woo waited for her on the penthouse terrace where they'd first kissed. The city sprawled below them, oblivious and glittering. He'd spent the afternoon in meetings with his attorneys, finalizing the last transfers that would sever his ties to the criminal empire he'd built. Everything legitimate was being consolidated into Jackson Lee Holdings, a name he'd chosen without asking, a partnership assumed before it was offered. Zoe found him there at sunset, her natural coils loose around her shoulders, wearing the smile that still made his chest tight with disbelief that she was real. "Marcus says you bought him a car," she said, settling into the chair beside him. "A Tesla." "Really?" "He needed transportation to his appointments." Sung-woo tried to look innocent and failed. "The model happened to have good safety ratings." "You're impossible." But she was laughing, the sound warm and unguarded in ways it hadn't been when they met. "What's this about?" "Jiwon said you needed to talk." His hand trembled slightly as he pulled the small box from his jacket pocket. 3 months ago, he couldn't have imagined this. Couldn't have imagined wanting a future that looked like anything other than revenge and slow deterioration. Then a woman had sat at his table and seen him instead of his wheelchair, had stayed when any reasonable person would have run, had fallen in love with the lonely man beneath the scars. "I'm offering you everything," Sung-woo said, opening the box to reveal a ring of platinum and sapphires, dark blue like the Chicago sky. "Not just my name or my money, a real life, a legitimate future. No more syndicate, no more looking over shoulders. Just us, building something that doesn't require violence to maintain." Zoe's eyes filled, her hand covering her mouth. "Sung-woo, marry me, not because you need me or because I saved you. Marry me because we chose each other when we were both drowning, and we're finally learning how to breathe." She kissed him instead of answering, tasting salt and promises and the end of loneliness. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Everything. Yes. Thank you for staying until the end. That means more than you think. If this story touched something inside you, subscribe, like, and tell me what you felt in the comments. I read every single one because this isn't just storytelling, it's connection. And if you're ready for the next journey, don't wander too far. The next story is already waiting in the dark.